I'm not sure if you've heard this, Catherine, but I think there's an election coming up.
I did hear that, Leah, and it's a big one for the climate. We need to make serious progress in the next 4 years to keep our hope of a better future within reach.
But there's also a tendency to think that what happens at the federal level is all that matters.
It makes sense why people might think that. The presidential election dominates the news cycle.
And don't get me wrong, the president matters a lot. But regardless of who runs the federal government, there are other places where we can make a big difference. Places where we can cut pollution and build thriving, healthy communities.
We call them the states.
So today we're going to tell a story of state-level climate action, and we're going to zoom in on one state in particular.
Where are we headed on this road trip, Leah?
Well, we're headed to a state that has been leading the way on climate. In 2023, the state passed a clean electricity standard that requires 100% of the power system to be carbon-free by 2040. It's one of the strongest laws in the nation.
Ooh, I do love a good clean electricity standard.
And since that law was passed, this state has also committed $2 billion to make that 2040 target possible. They've boosted clean transportation, worked on clean buildings, environmental justice, and so much more. And they've also revamped their state permitting process to make it easier to build clean energy and connect it to the grid. I'll give you a hint. Their governor has been in the news a lot lately.
Are we headed to the land of 10,000 lakes, aka Minnesota?
You guessed right.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, Leah, because I've heard that over the last couple of years, Minnesota has taken more bold climate action than perhaps any other state in the nation.
Welcome back to A Matter of Degrees. I'm Dr. Leah Stokes.
And I'm Dr. Catherine Wilkinson.
And today we're going to hear the story of how a powerful grassroots movement and forward-thinking politicians turned Minnesota into a climate leader.
So I'm a bit obsessed with Minnesota and the Midwest.
That's Amy Whitteman, who I work with at Rewiring America, where she's the vice president of Network. And before that, she worked at the Department of Energy and also at the Minnesota-based McKnight Foundation, where she designed and led their Midwest climate and energy program for over a decade.
I grew up in northern Wisconsin, and I married a Minnesotan. And the Midwest has always featured really prominently, one way or another, in my life and career. It's the highest greenhouse gas emitting region in the country on a per capita basis, given its heavy agriculture, industry, and a historical reliance on coal. And it's also, it's a part of flyover country, which is why I love it. For so long, the focus of the clean energy transition had been on the coasts. California, New York, Massachusetts leading the way. And yet the Midwest is where most of the emissions are. And by the way, every 4 years, the Midwest plays an instrumental role in where we go as a country. I am very biased. I think the Midwest is where it's at. When I think about our work in Minnesota, in the Midwest, I think about something that one of my favorite writers and thinkers says, Rebecca Solnit. And she says that societal transformation often occurs gradually, despite our expectation for quick results. She says the true power for change lies in grassroots movements, campaigns, and ordinary people who persistently advocate for their ideals over time. And so if you take the 100% clean energy bill that Governor Walz signed into law in early 2023 and look backwards, or if you look at the Inflation Reduction Act and look backwards in time, I really see these as stories of a grassroots movement that we built over years of ordinary people persistently advocating over time.
These big wins, they don't happen overnight, and they don't come from the top down, even when it seems like they do. They come from real people working really freaking hard over years and years to make change happen.
None of this was inevitable. We created a movement fueled by organized grassroots power and worked in every venue with every constituency and every angle you could think of. I loved the tagline of the 100% campaign in Minnesota, the campaign organized and led by the amazing Chris Conry. The tagline was, "To change everything, we need everyone."
Minnesota has this very, very robust sort of civic life that is still pretty darned earnest. And it's not just Democrats, it's kind of across the political spectrum. We have a very, very healthy civic space in Minnesota, which has changed my life.
That's Chris Conry, the organizer that Amy just mentioned. He's the managing director of 100%, a Minnesota-based advocacy group that led the movement for the clean electricity law.
Chris has been an organizer for decades, but it wasn't until a few years ago that he joined the climate movement.
It must have been early 2017. There was a March for Climate in Minnesota, and my now senior in high school daughter at that point was in elementary school, and she spoke at the March for Climate. And I remember seeing her on stage giving this speech, and I thought, oh my gosh, if I go to the end of my career and I never do any work on climate, I'm going to wonder what I was doing with my time.
So Chris got to work. Over the next 6 years, he ran one of the most successful state climate campaigns in American history. And it culminated in Minnesota's 100% clean electricity law and a whole lot of other smart climate policies.
Our diehard listeners may recall we did a whole episode on clean electricity standards back in 2021. And the deal with that policy is basically that electric utilities are required to draw more and more of their power from clean sources like solar, like wind, every year until they reach 100% clean generation, and in this case, in 2040.
So let's walk through what made Chris and the 100% campaign so successful.
First things first, they found clever ways to motivate and to message, bringing people together around a simple but often overlooked idea, the power of the positive.
We had a commitment to what we would call a big yes campaign. So for a variety of important historic reasons, the environmental movement is very good at stopping bad things and has spent a lot of years preventing things from getting cut down or preventing rivers from being dammed. We wanted to have something that was about what we're for. So a commitment to big yes. We did not subscribe to the theory that what motivates people is climate panic, but rather what motivates people is a vision of the future.
I love that so much. Here's the thing, climate change is profoundly sad and scary. And I think we have to honor that while also not getting stuck in the narratives of terrible, horrible, no good, very bad, that only make our overwhelm and a sense of why bother worse than it already is. And if we want people to come to this climate party, and we do, we have to emphasize positive ways that we can heal our planet.
I think that's spot on, and it's the exact same attitude that this coalition in Minnesota was bringing. They thought that they could improve the world, not just make it less bad.
As folks started to get on board, Chris and his team, they did another simple but powerful thing. They listened to people. They really met them where they were.
And it wasn't just a bunch of environmental organizations, right? The 100% campaign brought in community groups and environmental justice groups and faith-based groups and labor groups and many more.
There's a variety of things that get people to stick together, and it's different for different organizations. I'd say for the most part, it was about trying to find a way to meet at least most of people's interests over time. It's like being in relationship with people, hearing them out, negotiating, and trying to keep folks in the game with you.
And while many of these organizations had different priorities, different motivations, they all came together around the idea of a 100% clean electricity standard, because it's about so much more than just reducing pollution, healthier communities, good jobs, and making the economy more fair for everyone.
And that's how they got their team assembled. Off they went to the state capitol.
So basically in every session, we would have a big lobby day where literally hundreds of people would come and talk about this issue. And as we launched, we made a really intentional effort to make sure policymakers were hearing from constituents. And that really solidified its positioning for the next 5 years, that session, to where it was clearly a priority within the Democratic caucus in the House.
This was just one of the many initiatives they led to get folks engaged in politics. getting in there and speaking about what they believed in directly to their representatives in the state government.
This wasn't just a political movement. It was a social movement and a cultural movement.
Over the course of the campaign, I think we hosted 3 different concerts. We published an annual planner. We did different series of beautifully designed postcards that we would mail people through the election season. We actually produced an art installation. We literally, in our first year, we hosted a comedy show about climate change. So we were in a bar with comics, cracking jokes. That spirit and sense of optimism and sense of we're going to do something big together if we all do it together. It was unique and it was powerful, and it made people want to hang out with us.
This is making me want to hang out with them too.
I've seen this a lot in my own work. It's relationships that keep people moving forward together.
Absolutely. And when that policymaking window opened, the 100% coalition was ready.
The Democratic Farmer Labor Party, yes, that's a Minnesota thing, and we're going to tell you more about it later. They won a trifecta in the 2022 elections, controlling both the House and the Senate, and they had Governor Tim Walz at the helm.
There was, across the board, a lot of pent-up demand for change, which the state had not been able to execute at scale for a decade.
They knew this was their moment.
We'd had 5 years to figure out what the policy was and build consensus around it and get people bought in and explain it to people. But when it came time to hit go, the strategy was to move very, very quickly.
Which brings us to the Minnesota legislature. This is the place where the campaign's idea, it could actually be turned into law. And to tell this part of the story, we'll need to rewind back to the 2018 Minnesota state election.
I ran on climate. This was the issue that I talked most about in my campaign, and it's been the issue that I've been focusing on ever since.
That's Jamie Long, now the majority leader of the Minnesota State House of Representatives. He authored the 100% clean electricity bill.
Jamie had been working to push climate policy forward in Minnesota since he was first elected in 2018. It was before the 2022 midterms gave the Democratic Farmer Labor Party their governing trifecta. So they knew that this first bill, it wasn't going to pass. But they also knew that if they introduced it, it would show Minnesotans that they were ready to make a difference if voters supported them and gave them the majority.
There was an issue campaign, appropriately called the 100% campaign, that got started right when I was elected. And so we worked very closely together.
Jamie knew that if this policy was going to have a chance, they needed to bring as many people along as possible.
And that didn't just mean turning out people who already supported climate action. It meant engaging with people who might be neutral or disengaged or even oppose the policy. And they had to show up to those conversations ready to find common ground.
Labor in particular was one that we had to work very hard to make sure that we were bringing them along and that they felt heard as a part of the process. There were some labor unions that saw themselves in climate right away. The electrical workers, for example, who we knew were going to install a lot of solar panels. But then there were some local labor unions also that were representing coal plant workers, and they knew that they were going to see some tough times in the transition and some job loss.
Good climate policy is ultimately good for all of us in the long term. Well-designed laws create jobs, they grow new industries, they protect communities. But that doesn't mean that everyone benefits right away.
We really wanted to highlight that this was going to be good for jobs. And we knew that it would be on aggregate. Of course, that doesn't mean for every individual worker it will be. And so I think we don't want to gloss over that.
Policies like Minnesota's 100% clean electricity goal, they come with hard questions about what happens to the people who are employed by fossil fuel plants.
Jamie knew that if this bill was going to have a chance at passing one day, they couldn't afford to put off those hard questions.
So I had a meeting with all of the local labor unions across the state that represented fossil fuel workers. And to their credit, they understood that the clean energy transition was happening. And so they were looking for a fair deal. They wanted to make sure that we could put pressure on the companies to hire those workers who wanted to stay on, or for folks who were nearing retirement, that they could get a fair path to retirement. For folks who were younger in the workforce, that they could get some retraining.
And this is what was key. They didn't offer to water down the policy.
And they didn't have to. Instead, they went to the people who would be the most impacted and asked a really important question. How can I help?
So fast forward to 2022, and Jamie Long has already introduced this 100% clean electricity bill twice.
And both times it's been voted down by a divided state government.
And then the midterms came around.
So we now had Democratic control of state government for the first time in a decade, but it was narrow. So one of the things that I wanted to do was make sure that the opposition didn't have any time to work up a campaign against us. And so we went very fast. We introduced the bill right out of the gate, week one, and we wound up passing the bill within a month.
It was a sprint.
After a marathon decade of grassroots organizing, they had built the support and momentum and were persistent. So when the time came, they were ready on day one.
We hoped that they never saw it coming, that we were out of the gate fast enough. But I think also it was a testament to the amount of support that we'd built up.
And a testament to the broad movement sparked by Chris and the 100% campaign.
And it's no exaggeration to say that this is one of the most ambitious state-level climate policies in the entire country.
The endpoint is 100% clean energy by 2040. We also had some strong labor protections in the bill, so we included a prevailing wage requirement for all new renewable energy. So that means that you can't undercut the wages of good labor jobs in the clean energy sector. We had some important environmental justice provisions as well, making sure that the Public Utilities Commission could take into account environmental justice concerns when they were doing siting for projects. I'm really proud of the bill we put together.
And as we've talked about in the past, a clean electricity standard does more than just clean up the grid. Electricity is going to power buildings and cars. So when we decarbonize our electricity system, we're also able to cut pollution from our homes, our buildings, factories, vehicles. Clean electricity really is the cornerstone of a clean economy.
But even smart and ambitious climate laws like the Minnesota 100% bill, they can't do it alone. Those targets only work if we have a way to meet them. And Representative Jamie Long totally gets that. It's why he's been working overtime to make sure that the 2040 standard is backed by additional policies to build that clean electricity fast.
We definitely did not stop at 100%. So this past year, we passed a full-scale rewrite of our transmission permitting process. And the goal of having it be faster, right now it takes 10 years on average to get transmission built. And we knew that if we were going to get there by 2040, that was too long.
Minnesota's climate laws don't end with the electricity sector. They also updated their building codes to require new buildings to be cleaner every year. And they added rebates for people to buy electric cars, invested millions in electric vehicle charging stations, set up a green bank to use federal dollars in clean energy projects. They also made low-income housing more efficient. And a personal favorite of mine, they invested millions to put solar on school buildings across the state. They did a lot.
And in Minnesota, they are already starting to see the impacts of this whole suite of climate policies across the state. And that is something that Chris is pretty jazzed about.
So Minnesota's climate policies from 23 and 24 are starting to make a tangible difference in the lives of Minnesotans. And I think about it in a few different ways. One is there's obviously a set of family-level investments that are now easier for people. We set up everything from an electric panel upgrade program to incentives for electric bikes to programs that will help make it easier to own and operate a battery system. So there's a whole set of things that are at a sort of individual family level, people are hungry for.
But our households and our families, that's just one venue for change. And so many of the key solutions are beyond our immediate control.
Secondly, I think there are a whole set of things that are happening right now at a community and institutional level that are making a difference. So more cities are doing climate action planning and resilience planning. As I drive around Minnesota, I can see the construction happening. We are building a bus rapid transit line along that street. More people are going to be able to ride cleaner buses through my neighborhood because those laws passed.
And remember that positive vision for the future that Chris told us about earlier? It has started to happen.
All of these things should mean cleaner air and water for Minnesotans and the ability to protect more of the natural resources that we all love in the state. It's no joke. I mean, people here really, really care about the great outdoors and are very committed to protecting them. And this is actually not a Democratic or Republican thing. Every Minnesotan across the political spectrum is very proud of the place we live.
So why is Minnesota so good at this?
It's a great question. Why isn't this happening in every state if it's working so well there?
What's in the water in Minnesota?
Some of the things that make Minnesota unique are that it has a very strong history of civic engagement.
That's Amy Whitteman, who you heard from earlier in the episode.
It routinely has the highest voter turnout in the country. It has the highest charitable giving in the country, behind Iowa. The other thing that stands out with Governor Walz catapulting to the national scene is that many people have now heard these initials DFL. It's the initials for the Democrat Farm Labor Party.
The original Farmer Labor Party had a history of working on economic and social inequality, and those values have carried forward in the DFL.
And Amy told us that's exactly where change starts in Minnesota, in the community.
This commitment to strong social policy and investment in things like public schools and public services, this level of civic engagement, this bit that Governor Walz has talked about that's now in memes about caring for your neighbor, that is a dimension of how you need to think about making change in a place like Minnesota. Neighbor to neighbor conversations. When you host a meeting on a topic like 100% clean energy, people in Minnesota come to it.
These all seem like unique qualities that would make this strategy purpose-built to work in Minnesota.
So how can we take what we've learned from Minnesota to create change like this in other states?
We posed this very question to Amy, who has decades of experience working not just in Minnesota, but at the state level all over the country.
I had the chance to go and help stand up the U.S. States Policy Program at the Climate Imperative Foundation. I worked at the Energy Foundation, leading their states and regions program. So I've worked in other states. You got to find the people who are on the ground first. I can't come in and say, I know the best way to make change here. I can come in with some good questions. I can come in with some ideas. When I was at the Department of Energy, we could come in with programs and offerings, but it always starts, no matter what state you are in, with gathering together the people who do show up to the coffee klatch and getting to know them and starting to ask questions.
As Amy says, building a strong coalition isn't about having all of the answers. It's about taking the time to ask good questions and build good relationships.
And this is one of the lessons I'm taking away from the Minnesota story. At the heart of these climate wins is a strategy to create movements and policy that looks like the place where it's from. Inclusivity isn't just the right thing to do, it's the smart thing to do.
And that is definitely a lesson that we can use to replicate wins like this elsewhere.
So let's zoom out a bit. How important is this for the bigger picture of climate action across the United States?
I'm very bullish on the role of states when it comes to climate progress and clean energy action. First, you just have the fact that states are key venues for a lot of the decisions that are made about the power sector. Decisions about the electricity mix are made in state legislatures, at state PUCs, at the regional transmission organizations. But to me, it's something that is more dynamic than just that. And it's that states and cities, but states are really the test beds to build innovative models for policy and government investment, I think, on clean energy, on many issues, but clean energy. Progress at the state level is what has laid the foundation for eventual federal action. This is where we have been at in the US over the last 20 years.
which means there are certain areas of climate action that simply come down to state-level policy.
But that isn't the only importance of the states, right? As Amy explained to us, these states are also testing grounds for the next big thing.
I would say that what we saw with the Inflation Reduction Act, you can trace that to action at the state level. So increasing investment in renewables. Obviously, the IRA, because of reconciliation, had to all be on the investment side of things. But the work in Minnesota laying the groundwork for the adoption of those technologies, this built the type of support where we had the demand for an Inflation Reduction Act. And then simultaneously, as there was a trifecta in Minnesota, the governor could sign into law a 100% clean energy bill, and now is poised to be able to absorb those tax credits. It has made Minnesota more competitive to attract resources to the state to build out the clean technology there. We obviously have further to go. There's much further we need to go at the federal level with regulations. But I think Inflation Reduction Act was a huge victory, and I don't think we would have achieved it, both the policy or the power it was required to get it across the finish line, without all of the work that we'd been doing in the states for the last decade and a half.
So states play a huge role in U.S. climate progress because they expand our definition of what is possible.
When we have these positive examples at the state level, it not only shows us that these things are politically possible, it makes them easier to replicate.
Everybody loves a good role model, and Minnesota is a great example of what it looks like to lead the next wave of climate action. But it's happening in other states too. The very same year that Minnesota passed its 100% bill, right across Lake Superior, Michigan passed a 2040 clean electricity standard of their own.
And this means that the Midwest won't be the highest per capita polluter for much longer, because momentum is building.
And you have your states that we always look to, like California, New York. You know, some of the states that I'm most excited about right now include places like Maryland and Colorado. I'm really excited about this new clean heat standard in Colorado that they passed in May. This is an innovative policy establishing greenhouse gas reduction targets for gas distribution utilities. I think that's an example of like the next wave of policies that need to be passed at the state level that then can be the test bed, the example for eventual federal actions.
States push the boundaries of our political imagination. They build constituencies, they test and they prove the big ideas.
The sweet sauce of change, of durable change, is this virtuous cycle where we have states pass ambitious clean energy laws or standards, and they then position themselves to be on the front lines to receive federal funds. And then with those federal funds, states can deploy more clean energy at the household level, distributed, utility scale. And then there's a constituency that is developed that can push for even more ambitious state action.
We grow the movement when people start experiencing the benefits of this legislation. People look at the state next to them, they see these benefits in action, and they want them for themselves.
And that's how state policy can make federal action even more impactful. You know, if the money is flowing from the Inflation Reduction Act into a state that also has a clean electricity standard, it goes farther because there's something to do with those dollars.
We need more than one tool to drive change on the scale that the climate crisis demands. And getting really solid climate policy in the states, that makes federal wins even stronger.
And so we asked Amy, now that we understand how important states are for climate policy, what should we be working towards next? Where does this leave us?
We need to be sure we win the win. We need to be sure that after we pass historic climate legislation, that it is implemented well. And there's so much that it takes to implement laws well, a law of this size and magnitude over the next 7 years. Like, this is going to transform the economy. It's going to transform the landscape, but it's all hands on deck. It's not just like moving to the next legislative fight. We have to be doing both things simultaneously, but we have to keep our eye on implementation And then we have to keep pushing, because as much as we have accomplished, we still have to do more. It still isn't going fast enough. But if we can get that flywheel going and keep it going and be able to chew gum and walk, I think that not only will we be reducing emissions, we're going to be improving people's lives in really, really demonstrable ways. This is about someone who is breathing pollutants from their gas stove, whose kid has asthma, no longer having that machine in their house.
Passing a policy is the middle of the story. It is not the end.
And Minnesota is a great example of what is possible when you're able to get that virtuous cycle going. As we heard from Chris Conry and Jamie Long, the 100% law was only the beginning.
Since passing the clean electricity standard, they've added new investments to cut climate pollution from nearly every sector of the economy.
Right, they didn't just pass one bill and pack up their bags and go home.
They made sure to win the win.
And they showed us the enormous potential of state climate action.
Minnesota is a great story. There are lessons to be learned from Minnesota, and there are things about Minnesota that are special to that place. And we need that type of ambition and action in every state in the country.
To change everything, we need everyone.
And states jumpstart these virtuous cycles, building momentum towards a greener, brighter future for all of us.
People can see what a clean energy future looks like, and they get excited.
And that support speeds up the pace of change.
And one of the best ways that we can speed up that progress is by electing climate champions, from our state capitals to Capitol Hill, from the top of the ballot to the bottom. It all matters.
Down ballot races are so important. And it's no exaggeration to say that the fate of the planet is truly on the line in this election season. That's why Leah and I are going to be taking a few weeks off to focus our attention on this moment.
But we'll be back soon to talk about the next frontiers of decarbonization, how to clean up pollution from the industrial sector, and what the outcome of the election is going to mean for all of us.
Until then, dear listeners, we'll see y'all at the polls.
A Matter of Degrees is co-hosted by me, Dr. Leah Stokes.
And me, Dr. Catherine Wilkinson.
We are a production made in partnership with Frequency Media, the 2035 Initiative at UC Santa Barbara, and the All We Can Save Project.
Thanks to our funders and supporters who make this show possible, including the 11th Hour Project. Special thanks to Fossil Free Media and the Make Polluters Pay campaign, which is working to hold big oil accountable for the damage they're doing to our climate and our communities. Find out more at makepolluterspay.net.
And if you're digging the show, please hop on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and give us a 5-star rating or leave us a review.
Script writing, fact-checking, communication, and production support are by Lucas Boyd, Alex DeLeo, Quinn Lewis, Kristen Palmstrom, and Anusha Singh.
At Frequency Media, Michelle Corey is our executive producer. Lizzie Stewart is our producer, and Claire Badgary-Curtis is our editor and sound designer.
Rose Wong designed our show art, Sean Marquand composed our theme song, and additional music came from Blue Dot Sessions.
Find us online at degreespod.com and at degreespod on the artist formerly known as Twitter. And you can also find us on YouTube.
And stay tuned for more stories for the climate curious. No, more excitement. AKA Minnesota.
Yes, I like to call it the Canada of America, personally.